KRCB, Green Treks Network. On the next episode of Natural Heroes,
he was a writer whose words and ideas unleashed the radical environmental movement in the U.S.
He said outrageous things. He exaggerated to get people's attention, and he got it.
I regard the wilderness as my home, and when it's being invaded by clear-cutters and strip miners, I feel not only the right, but the duty, the moral obligation to defend it by any means I can.
major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources.
And by the Sierra Club, more than 1 million natural heroes committed to promoting smart energy solutions and dedicated to exploring, enjoying, and protecting the planet.
He was a writer whose words and ideas unleashed the radical environmental movement in the U.S., a free spirit whose passion for wild places earned him the title Thoreau of the American West.
Well, I've done most of my defending of the West with a typewriter, which is an easy and cowardly way to do it.
He said outrageous things. He exaggerated to get people's attention, and he got it.
He was a man who had a lot of brains and a lot of soul, and he put his perceptions down on paper.
Ed inspired more people than anybody else I know to go out and defend the wilderness.
The man who inspired such passion was Edward Abbey, a writer who hated being called a naturalist, and yet became one of the most important voices for wilderness preservation in the 20th century.
The canyon country of southern Utah and northern Arizona, the Colorado Plateau, is something special, something strange, marvelous, full of wonders. As far as I know, there's no other region on Earth much like it, or even remotely like it. Nowhere else have we had this lucky combination of vast sedimentary rock formations exposed to a desert climate, a great plateau carved by major rivers, the Green, the San Juan, the Colorado, into such a surreal land of form and color.
The Southwest was Abbey's country. The land became an integral part of his work. He spent his summers as a ranger in some of the most scenic places in America and used his words to try and stop the destruction he saw happening around him.
To me, Ed Abbey expressed the soul of the real West in the last half of the 20th century.
Abbey was a larger-than-life figure whose exploits were the stuff of legends. Angry and painfully honest, he lived with the same passion that characterized his writing.
He loved the wilderness because he related to it so much, because he felt so at home in it that he didn't want it destroyed. But part of the outrage that you hear with Ed is humor, is his way of bringing people's attention to something he thought was very important.
I see this as an invasion. These look like creatures from Mars to me.
He'd like to be descended from Joseph Wood Crouch and people like that, and he isn't. He's descended from Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut. Vonnegut's a parallel to Abbey. They're both intensely moral people. They're both angry, and God knows Ed was angry, using humor, I think, both to deliver their message and in a real big way just to stay sane.
Edward Abbey was born and raised around the tiny Appalachian community of Home, Pennsylvania. The oldest of 5 children, Abbey's literary talent surfaced at an early age.
This is something that maybe many people don't know about Ed, that up until he had really entered adulthood, he had not quite made up his mind whether he wanted to be a writer, a painter, or a musician. And I'm glad he opted for writing.
And he wrote about himself. I mean, that's really Ed's topic. It wasn't the environment. It wasn't the Southwest. It was Ed. It was Ed and what he took in from his surroundings.
In the summer of 1944, Edward Abbey was a skinny 17-year-old with a strong desire to see his country before being drafted into the Army. Hitchhiking and riding the rails cross-country, it was then that he first laid eyes on the stark landscapes of the West.
He went on one trip out there before going in the service, a brief trip out there hitchhiking and riding the rails, and was astounded by it. That was the land he wanted to really immortalize. And it was the sense of freedom there, as well as the landscape.
I started a novel my last year in college, way back in spring of '51 at New Mexico. A terrible novel called Jonathan Troy. As terrible as it was, nevertheless was published, and made me think of myself as a writer.
Abbey earned his undergraduate degree from the University of New Mexico in 1951, and 8 years later received a master's in philosophy. His graduate thesis reflected his lifelong political leanings. It was called Anarchism and the Morality of Violence. During the 1950s, Abbey struggled as a writer. Several books were rejected by publishers before his second novel, The Brave Cowboy, was published in 1956.
I almost gave up at that point. By that time, I was working part-time, seasonally, for the Park Service as a ranger. And I gave serious thought to being a permanent, half-time park ranger. I was going to make a career out of seasonal work.
The Brave Cowboy is one of the first things he ever really, the first serious piece he ever wrote. And it's a standard by which he lived his life. And it's a great novel. It's an early novel, but a great novel.
With the publication of The Brave Cowboy, Abbey's literary career was starting to take off. The book attracted the attention of Hollywood, and in 1962, Kirk Douglas starred in the film version of the novel, which was retitled Lonely of the Brave. Abbey received a check for $7,500 and a small bit part in the movie. Taos, New Mexico was an exciting place to be in the late 50s. Abbey decided to try his hand at journalism when he was offered the job of editor at the Taos paper. It was there that he met an artist who would become his lifelong friend, John Dupuy.
Those were the roots of the beginning of the Monkey Wrench Gang, really. Some fool in Las Vegas, New Mexico, the Melody Sign Company put up about 12 immense 40, 50-foot signs, and so everybody on the paper went out in the middle of the night and sawed them down. And the next week, the owner of the company came to put an ad in the paper for the apprehension of these criminals. And Ed, being the editor, took the ad and burst out laughing. So Mr. Melody asked him what was so funny. He said, "Nothing, I'm thinking of something else."
Like The Brave Cowboy, Abbey's next novel, Fire on the Mountain, also pitted a rugged individualist against a society determined to make him conform. It was published in 1962 and later became a TV movie starring Ron Howard.
But good God, I mean, you go back to the 50s, this guy is touting things that were very unusual for that time. Because with Ed, his criticism of what we call industrialism or the factory system or consumer society was not casual or flip. It was gut level. As his anarchism wasn't casual either. He was a philosophical anarchist. He wrote his MA thesis on 19th century anarchist thinkers. It wasn't just some costume he put on so he'd look zany and bohemian.
As a young man, Abbey made many trips throughout the West, always writing in his journal while exploring canyons, mesas, mountains, and rivers. In 1959, on a float trip down the Colorado through a doomed canyon, Abbey met his future adversary face to face. The construction of Glen Canyon Dam for Abbey came to symbolize the destruction of the West. From that point on, Edward Abbey's writing became a crusade to save what was left.
I objected to it because it destroyed one of the most beautiful canyons in the world. A canyon, I think, equal in beauty, grandeur, importance to the Grand Canyon. Quite different, but equally beautiful.
In all his work, that's his trip down through Glen Canyon before the dam. There's this odd thing always going on about how great it is, and yet you can hear the footsteps behind you that are going to kill it.
Edward Abbey's writing and philosophy came together in 1968 with the publication of Desert Solitaire, a personal account of his 2 seasons as a ranger at Arches National Monument in southern Utah during the mid-50s.
Right about here was the official entrance station. I used to sit over here on a folding chair and answer questions in case a tourist showed up. Sometimes one did. I lived right over here in a little plywood house trailer. There were a few holes in the floor so the rats and snakes could get in and out. It's gone now. The government made this place a road maintenance supply depot, that gravel dump over there. When I die, if I live that long, I'd like to be buried under this pile of gravel here, if the Park Service would be so kind.
This small, unpretentious book launched Abbey's career as an essayist and defender of wilderness, and although he could never understand its popularity, the book propelled him to the forefront of the budding environmental movement and rescued him from literary obscurity.
And he could never understand the great success of Desert Solitaire. I mean, this is just a bunch of garbage pieces that he sort of ground out one after another, and he threw them all together in a big box and kind of shook them out and, you know, gave them a little transition here and there. And, you know, it just slid right off the right part of his brain, and and therefore he took very little credit for it. You know, he went to the grave not really understanding the success of that. He wanted to be thought of, I think, generally as a novelist. You know, but once anybody creates a piece of work like Desert Solitaire, which was an American masterpiece, it has a life of its own, and not even the artist owns it anymore. I mean, I'm sorry, but Ed's opinion of his own work is just one of several here. You know.
Although Desert Solitaire was never Abbey's personal favorite, he succeeded not only in writing a classic ode to the disappearing West, but also in creating a whole subculture of die-hard young environmentalists who would follow his every word.
There is a family of us out there. There is a clan of us out there, and I think the writings of Ed Abbey are the common denominator. They define a group of people in the West, and we know we belong together. And that may have been Ed's real genius.
We need wilderness because we are wild animals. Every man needs a place where he can go to go crazy in peace. Every Boy Scout troop deserves a forest to get lost, miserable, and starving in. Even the maddest murderer of the sweetest wife should get a chance for a run to the sanctuary of the hills, if only for the sport of it, for the terror, freedom, and delirium.
Abbey once wrote in his journal, "If wilderness is outlawed, only outlaws can save wilderness."
He felt, and I think that this is one of the greatest things he ever said, that a true patriot has to be willing to defend his country against his government. And I believe that.
The way I defined Earth First in the beginning stages was that Earth First was made up of Ed Abbey-style conservationists.
I regard defending the wilderness something like defending your own home. I regard the wilderness as my home, my true ancestral home. And when it's being invaded by clear cutters and strip miners, I feel not only the right, but the duty, the moral obligation to defend it by any means I can.
In 1975, Edward Abbey's most popular and controversial novel was published. The Monkey Wrench Gang told the tale of 4 environmental desperados who turned their passion for preserving wilderness into action. The 4 main characters tried to halt the destruction of the West by blowing up bridges and trains, disabling bulldozers, and plotting to destroy their ultimate nemesis, Glen Canyon Dam. The book not only brought Abbey's rather extreme environmental views into the mainstream, but also inspired the real-life eco-sabotage of the radical environmental group Earth First.
The Monkey Wrench Gang was indirectly inspirational. We talked about encouraging that idea more as a mythos, as a style.
In 1981, Dave Foreman and friends were looking for a way to draw attention to their newly formed environmental group, Earth First. They got that attention by taking on Glen Canyon Dam, Abbey's own symbol for the ruination of the West. Abbey was invited to speak to the faithful while a symbolic crack was made in the dam. The publicity stunt worked. Earth First was launched, and although Abbey was never an official member of Earth First, he served as a role model and inspiration for many in the radical group.
What is the use of building a great city if you haven't got a tolerable planet to build it on? Earth first.
The inspiration for the Monkey Wrench Gang lay deep in Edward Abbey's past. The 4 main characters in the book were based on the monkey-wrenching exploits of Abbey and some of his closest friends.
Originally, they were inspired by people I know, you might say that, but as I began writing the story, they became more and more fictional, more and more imaginary.
Well, I mean, we talked about a lot of that. But as you know, talk is cheap. Yeah. I mean, he did. I mean, he didn't totally make it up, but,
Ed said he changed the names to protect the guilty.
Abbey made a clear moral distinction between sabotage and terrorism, which he defined as violence against people.
Sabotage is an active force or violence against property or machinery in which life is not endangered or should not be. Terrorism, on the other hand, is violence against living things, human beings, and other living things.
Things happened, and I'm not going to talk about precisely what they were because I really don't know what the statute of limitations is. For Ed, they've run out, but I'm still here.
Whoever the publisher was, their legal staff had Ed write me just this very embarrassing letter how I should only, feel that the good parts of Hayduk are me and not the bad parts. So I burned the letter. That was the end of that.
Anyway, my role is just to write books. I'm not really trying to do anything more than that. Write some good books, if possible, and enjoy my life and the lives of my family and friends. And my enemies. I enjoy their problems, too.
In the 1980s, Abbey published Good News, a futuristic Western that foretold the collapse of industrial civilization. Abbey also began serious work on a book which he had conceived over 30 years earlier. He called this book Adventures of the Barbarian, a title he later changed to The Fool's Progress. It was a picaresque novel based on Abbey's own life.
He'd wanted Fool's Progress to be a superb, masterful novel. This was the novel that he had been working toward all his life.
Abbey's work on the novel came to an unexpected halt in 1982.
Ed had not been feeling too well, so Clark and I loaded him into the truck and took him off to the hospital. The next day, Ed was diagnosed as having pancreatic cancer, and he turned to me and he said, "Well, Jack, I guess I won't have to floss anymore."
The diagnosis of cancer, fortunately, was wrong, but Abbey's ailment was still quite serious. What had started as a painful bout of pancreatitis became a condition that would cause internal bleeding from his esophagus. Abbey battled this ailment for 7 more years. The first few months of 1989 saw Abbey's health slip. He was in and out of the hospital several times. By the end of February, it appeared that the end was near.
This is Ed's office, or cabin as he called it. He hated to call it office. His desk, chair, the old Royal typewriter that he loved so dearly. He hated electric ones. Of course, it's changed a lot. No books now. This is just the way he liked it. It's very simple, plain. This is actually where he died, right here in the cabin. Sort of his last wish, not to be in a hospital.
Edward Abbey died on March 14, 1989. The day before, his friends and family had taken him out to the desert to wait for the end. When death didn't come, Abbey was brought back to the cabin in the backyard of his Tucson home. He died there the next morning, surrounded by his wife and a few close friends.
I was just gutted the morning he died, and I think what gutted me more than his death was how upset I was. But sometimes I'm driving around in the desert and I'll see a cloud floating over the land, and it'll be kind of one of those dark clouds, like a fist inside it. Now think of Ed, like he's up there floating over the landscape, angry. But for some reason, he's got this crazy smile on his face. Don't ask why.
In his journal, Abbey left specific instructions on what to do following his death. He wanted to be transported in the back of a pickup truck to his burial site. Disregard all state laws regarding burial. He wanted his body to help fertilize a cactus, a cliff rose, a sagebrush, or a tree. No undertaker, no embalming for God's sake, no coffin.
God, he did die well. The last great smile Ed ever gave was when he was told where he was going to be buried. You know, that was good.
Abbey wanted not a funeral, but a wake, with music, food, booze, a bonfire, and lots of dancing. He got not one, but 2 wakes. One in Saguaro National Monument near Tucson, and the other in the Slick Rock Desert near Moab, Utah, and Arches National Park. Edward Abbey was 62 years old when he died. He left behind 5 children, a wife, 3 ex-wives, 21 books, and a legend that looms larger every year.
He would like to feel that his greatest contribution was his literature and his writing, because he considered himself a writer first and an environmentalist second, if at all. But I think his environmental impact has been tremendous. And that, I think, is probably going to, the effect of that is going to outlive the effect of his literature.
Benediction. May your trails be crooked, winding, lonesome, dangerous, leading to the most amazing view. May your mountains rise into and above the clouds. May your rivers flow without end, meandering through pastoral valleys, tinkling with bells, past temples and castles and poets' towers, into a dark primeval forest where tigers belch and monkeys howl, through miasmal, mysterious swamps infested with crocodiles, and down from there into a desert of red rock, blue mesas, domes and pinnacles and grottos of endless stone, and down, down again into a deep, vast, ancient, unknown chasm where bars of sunlight blaze on profiled cliffs, where deer walk across the white sand beaches, where storms come and go as lightning clangs upon the high crags, where something strange and more beautiful and more full of wonder than your deepest dreams waits for you beyond that next turning of the canyon walls. So long, I thank you very much.
Major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources.
And by the Sierra Club, more than 1 million natural heroes committed to promoting smart energy solutions and dedicated to exploring, enjoying, and protecting the planet.
For more information about Natural Heroes, to purchase videos, or to submit your film, visit naturalheroestv.org or call 1-800-287-2722. Green Treks Network. KRCB